They moved your button.
Here we go.
One of these days, I'm going to click leave meeting.
Okay. That'll be a sad day.
So Liz, I think you wanted us to remind you to introduce yourself. Was that true?
Yes. That is in fact the case. Hi, everybody. Welcome to D3TV. We've stopped counting episodes, but if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that this is maybe 17.
I've heard you say that before.
Oh, really? So maybe it's 18?
I think I've heard you say it's 17. Maybe not in
Okay.
this context, but definitely you said the number 17 in my presence.
Okay. It's above 15 is my feeling.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited to welcome today Eleanor Whitney, who's a writer, editor, and senior content strategist. She's our guest. This is our first outside D3 guest. And I'm here as usual with Jonathan Blessing, D3 CEO, and I'm Liz Flyntz, Director of UX and Design at D3. Welcome, Eleanor.
Welcome, Whitney.
Thank you.
I've known Eleanor since 2013 in the dark ages when we worked in arts administration in Dumbo, basically a decade ago. And yeah, Eleanor, can you say a little bit about what you do and what it means to be a content strategist?
Sure. Thanks, Liz and Jonathan. I'm really excited to be here. So a content strategist is someone who works with companies. They don't necessarily have to be tech companies, but every company these days has a tech element and thinks about how they use content. So that could be articles, reports, video, audio, anything that tells someone about something through some sort of medium, how they use that to talk about who they are as a company, what they do, what their brand is, and provide some kind of value for their audience or users or community. So that's a very broad definition. What that's looked like in my career is I work for what could generally be considered startups or, small to medium companies that are growing quickly in the tech space. I especially work for companies that would be in the business to business space. So selling to other businesses, a service or a product that will help them achieve their goals rather than business to consumer, right? Like I'm not in my world, I'm not trying to sell a lot of a product, but rather meet an audience and solve a problem for them. And I think that's where content's really important. So I have a background in arts education and administration, and about a decade ago, I shifted careers to work in tech startups. I began as a community manager. So again, which is another way to meet people where they are, understand their needs, and help them connect with what a company offers to help that community achieve their goals. And then I shifted more into marketing and specialized in content. So I'm also a writer and editor in my outside of work life. So it's been a great way to bring my creative passion into a more structured environment where I can help a company grow and achieve their goals. So currently I work at a company called Lively. We are a benefits solutions provider. We focus on HSA and FSAs now, which are health savings accounts or flexible spending accounts. And I've also worked at legal services company called Axiom, office services company, dearly departed, managed by Q, as is the case in the startup world, things change, and a coding boot camp and a 3D printing company. So a lot of different types of businesses. And I think something that's really interesting about being in content is you really learn what a company does and what people's concerns are in that space. So as someone who would consider themselves a lifelong learner, it's like really fun in that way, because you just really get into it about a specific industry or community.
Cool. Yeah. It's so something that we talked a little bit about before that I hope that you could help clarify is kind of the big directions of content strategy. And you talked a little bit about this, but it seems to me like there's two major tracks, which is that businesses can use content strategy as part of their marketing campaign. So it's their self-presentation and their part of their market strategy. And the other piece is when content is part of the business's primary product offering or service offering. So, like for instance, a big newspaper like the New York Times, for instance, probably has two different tracks of content strategy. One is how they market themselves, and the other one is how they deal with the content that is their primary product. Yeah. And does that seem correct to you, or do you think there's other models out there for content strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing to me is that, like everything in this economy, the idea of like having sort of a dedicated content person who is maybe more in an editorial role, which I would kind of consider myself, really came about in the last decade. Like I always tell people younger than me, like, listen, my job did not exist when I graduated college. Like this was not an option. You may have been able to go to, say, an ad agency and worked on content in that way, but I don't think in this way where you're really thinking about like, how do we use this to either, support our product or as our product or support our brand is an evolving field. So I think companies are going to do this differently depending on their needs. Someone like the New York Times actually probably has many content strategies because they have so many verticals of like what they are doing and who they're talking to. But I think if we're going to take like a startup style tech company, I kind of see it in there's two realms. There's like the product side where you're either talking about like, how do we present a product like in our app or our dashboard or whatever? Like, how does a user understand how to use our product, especially if it's a software product or a tech product? That can be a content strategy. What kind of help do we give users like in the product itself? That can also be a content strategy, but that could also fall under product marketing.
Or sometimes UX writing is,
Or UX writing, absolutely. Or like, is content part of like, what we're selling or offering to our community or our users, so that could be, we're seeing that a lot with writers now using things like Substack or other subscription models. Content is their business. So that's part of it. And then I think the other side, which is more my side of it, is the brand strategy. So we are thinking especially about content as a marketing muscle. So something where we're providing value to our community to not only tell people about who we are as a company and why we're great, but to show them that we provide value in this industry, that we know what we're doing and talking about. And that might be through presenting original research or it could be through, sharing our executive perspectives on different issues in the field, or, talking about new legislation and its impact on a certain field. It's really more thinking about how do we want to be known as a brand and how do we build trust with our community. So that's really how I think about it. Yeah, Jonathan.
So what advice would you give, say, an organization like ours, Door3, in terms of finding our voice in our copy? So how do you go about discovering like a brand's voice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one of my favorite things to do. And I think that can really be important because ultimately your content is going to ladder up to that voice, and that voice is going to be woven throughout. So I always like to start and just understand, a brand or a company's mission statement. What do you see yourselves doing? And are you a disruptor in an older space, and you're coming with a new idea? Is this a new field and you're pioneering it, or you're figuring it out? Are you kind of a small fish that's trying to make an impact in a big pond? Just like, how do you see yourselves? Because that's really going to help determine the voice. And then understanding the other side of it, which is the audience. Like, who is your audience? Where are they getting their information? How do they expect to be spoken to? Do you want to do that differently? If so, how? What do you think is more effective? Just like learning where you are in what space. And then I think it's understanding what is the range of that voice? Like,
what do you look for in terms of response or effectiveness in order to refine or like relocate the voice? So over time.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, as a brand or
well,
company,
I'm asking selfishly. I figure, I've got you here, Eleanor, and Liz asked me to come here, so I'm going to ask questions that are on my mind.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, I think the most important thing, just to back up a little bit, I love this question about voice, is when a company, and I've said this to you, I think before, thinks about content and how it plays into their strategy, you really, and I say this all the time, like, you can't take an if we build it, they will come approach to content. I think the days of a company just being like, let's have a blog, are over. Like, you need to be really strategic about how you use your resources. So I think a channel like this on YouTube is such a cool idea and a great use of resources. So, thinking consciously about how this voice is going to apply and how it's going to help us move our mission forward. That said, I think as a company matures or content strategy matures, something I do is, because I'm often coming into companies where there might be some things, or there's something that's been working for a few years, but it needs to mature a little. And I'll look at what's there and just say, like, okay, this is what I'm noticing, so I think taking a step back and so something I often notice is like, wow, things are really wordy, or okay, we're really just, my favorite word, perseverating too much on certain things. Like, are we really meeting our users where they are? How can we refine this? What do we like about this? Okay. So I think thinking like that. So if you can take stock of what you have every few, 6 months, a year and a half, that can be really helpful. And I think just really thinking about, how does this connect with other ways we talk about ourselves? So if you're running digital ads, or have a sales pitch deck, do all these things kind of sound like they're coming from the same company? Then you can start to think about, like, what are the gradations of voice? How do we want to sound on our social or on our blog or on our YouTube channel versus in our pitch deck, versus in a press release? But it's like, until you kind of have a few of those, it's a little hard to see. So I know with a lot of things with content, it's not as much of a science as it is just an art, and really thinking about, like, what makes sense coherently across sort of the whole spectrum of what we have. So something I like to do is I made kind of a meter of how, thinking about hot sauce, like, how spicy is this language? So our support center language is going to be real mild, right? It's just like factual, to the point, friendly, helpful, versus the spectrum might be like a digital ad where you need to, like, provoke someone to change their behavior in like half a second of reading a headline, right? So, like,
right.
Then you think about the spectrum of language, and you can start to see where different things land on that. But until you really know, like, this is the spectrum of content, it's a little hard to do, so I wouldn't say.
I like the idea. I really like the idea of calling, like, Apple support for help, and being connected with someone who's using really spicy language.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
yeah, I like that idea.
It would be maybe interesting, but maybe not effective as someone who is, like, just needing help with their product, right?
So where does content strategy and content production intersect? Like, are you creating content? Is that typical? Do you need a content strategist and a copywriter?
Yeah, that's a great question. They intersect very much. And I think in some companies, or like, say, an agency, there's going to be strategists and there's going to be copy managers and copywriters, and it's going to be this whole universe. Whereas in a smaller company, or even a mid-sized company, that's not the case. So often content strategists are, while they work, like myself, work for a larger marketing department, kind of usually housed under brand. we're usually a team of one and supported by, in my case, some really talented freelancers. So I do strategy and I will also do content production. I think what is really important is you want to think about when you have like one or two in-house people, what is their strengths and how is their time best spent? So for example, I write for my current company, Lively, I write our long form reports and white papers because that's really about like speaking to the industry of benefits and healthcare and understanding those subtleties, versus our blog articles, which are shorter, are often very focused on SEO and search engine optimization language and are about specific topics. It's almost like I would spend so much time writing those. I couldn't do other stuff and I couldn't be in the strategy and I couldn't be working with my colleagues. So for us, it makes sense to work with freelancers who can do those very quickly and are, working in this space. So I think every company needs to define what that is, but as you grow, it may make more sense to have sort of a senior person doing strategy in the big overview, and then another, like a copywriter or someone who's really writing. I think the other part about this is operations or marketing operations, that content really needs to think about things like, if we are using our content to capture leads and nurture them through a certain sales funnel, how does that interact with our sales cycle? How does that interact with whatever our database is? So something like Salesforce or Marketo, like you also have the technical side of it. So how that gets supported in different marketing departments really depends on a company.
And are you personally involved in kind of lead generation, nurturing, and transition into the sales space?
I don't do like, say, the handoff, but I am the one sort of writing those reports saying like, okay, here's a top of the funnel piece of content that's going to get someone in, and what is the email sort of sequence that they get, what's in those emails. But I'm feel very lucky. Like I'm supported, or my team is supported by a marketing operations department that sees to the technical side and what we call growth or demand generation, who's really thinking like holistically about like what that sales funnel looks like. And I feel like I am a colleague to them. So I think, again, it's going to vary, like what your company is, what your focus is, how big your marketing team is. But I sometimes feel like content strategy is in the hot seat because it sits between so many things, right? And when you're not sure what it is, it can kind of be anything, right? Is it then like sales comes to you and says, I need a new PowerPoint? And, is that your job? Is that not your job? Like that's something companies really need to define, or else it can get very messy very quickly. So,
and you must work very closely with whoever holds the vision at your organization, right? Whatever executive holds the vision, in order to ensure that, the language you're using for communicating that vision is consistent with the vision.
Absolutely. And I think this is, again, something that may get defined differently depending on your company. But what I'm always like kind of checking against is our overall company messaging, which in my current company has been defined and refined by our product marketing team. In past companies, that was much more just the marketing team as a whole, or the marketing executives working on that. We didn't have product marketing in that way. So it depends, but absolutely, you need to be checking against or laddering up to that vision. So to help people do that, that's why I have the sort of language meter. I have like, say this, don't say that. I make a style guide, basically. I think that's one of the first and most important things you can do, so that you have something to at least react against, or at least say like, okay, this is how we're talking about ourselves. Is this right? Like, do we feel like this is correct? And that can evolve, as a company does. But yeah, you have to. And again, I think that's why sometimes content can feel really activated and really personal, because it is about how a company kind of lives their values and lives their messaging and lives their
and I know, Liz, you told me you had a lot of questions, and I wasn't really sure what I'm supposed to do, but I have more questions. Can I ask another question?
Yeah, ask another
am I just
question.
bulldozing over? Okay. Maybe the last question for Eleanor from me. How long do you think it takes for you? So when you're in a new environment or organization, how long does it take you to really kind of find your sea legs and begin feeling comfortable just producing content that you feel speaks to the vision, achieves whatever the near-term marketing strategy is? Yeah, like tell me about that.
Well, like everything, it depends. It depends what exists, right? It's more like, okay, do you already have a status quo that you're doing that you're happy with, or it needs to evolve, but it's fine. In that case, the ramp up could be much quicker because you're not building something from scratch. You're evolving what's there so you can get comfortable with what's there and then assess what's there and push it a little further. I think versus some companies that you might be, again, building something from scratch. So that's going to take, I even hesitate to give it a time frame.
It's just us.
I want to say 4 to 6 months, but if you're, again, if say you need to build a blog and integrate that with your systems and think about the design of it and all that, of course it can take longer. Things that I've noticed though are, in one company I worked for, I launched a blog and they'd been a company for almost, at that point, 15, coming on 20 years. And they were like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. You were able to launch this blog. Like, they were really choosing perfection over any kind of progress, right? Like they were so afraid to put anything out there that they'd had the blog built, but they were like, oh, we really just got to build out this strategy so much. And I think sometimes when we're in the digital space, I want to remind people, like, it's not that serious. You have to try to learn, And
I know. And we're working with clay, not concrete.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean be flippant about it, but don't let fear stop you. But, I think like any role, I really feel that it takes 3/4 of a year to a year to really, really internalize it and understand it, and then be able to go even quicker. But when it comes to, executing and producing, it can be a quick ramp up if there's already systems in place. If there's not, it can take a little longer. So just thinking, it's also thinking about like, what's our first step? What's our second step? What all the usual things. What do we need? What's a nice to have? How does this ladder up to our sales strategy, our marketing strategy, and our overall, company strategy overall? When you don't have that, and if you're lacking like that larger strategy, I think that's when content can really get lost, because it's like, what are we running towards? Why are we making this stuff? And what are we trying to say?
And how much do you think, like, it seems, obviously your background is writing and you are also a writer, and it seems like when we say content, most of the time the content we're talking about is actually writing, although of course content means video and photography and illustration and everything else that can go in a digital product. But how important do you think writing is as a basis for this? When a company is looking for a content strategist, should they be looking for somebody that has a strong writing background as like the absolute basis of that position? I don't know. Just how do you feel about like the primacy of writing within this role or discipline?
I'm totally biased, so I'm a writer. So I think writing, or at least a comfort with language and communication, is extremely important. I do want to say, though, my background's kind of unique, I guess, because my background, while it's in writing, it's also in public programming and fundraising for the arts. And I think that's actually really important, because it's not just about writing. It's about taking an idea, breaking it down, saying these are the fundamental things, and this is how I'm going to display it and show it across a variety of mediums. So if you think about a museum exhibition, what are the public programs that are going to support that? How are you going to make programs that kind of get at different ideas of that exhibition? Like, that's how I feel about content strategy. Same with fundraising. How are you going to show someone that your idea supports their mission so they'll support you, you know? So I think it's actually more in that being able to think really critically. And I think if someone's comfortable with language, it really helps to be like a good quote unquote writer. But I also think, like, if that's not someone's strong suit, that's you can hire really good writers, and I do, because they're faster than me and they just like can get to it real quick. I think though it depends on what a company needs, right? Like, if you've decided video is where you need to invest, then you're going to need someone, you know, who's technical in that and can think about that or work with that kind of freelancers. You know, it just depends on what your needs are. I think, you know, we experiment, or there's always a new thing to do, you know, are you podcasts, for example, everyone wants to have a podcast, or, the pivot to video a decade or so ago, which we now know was all like Facebook faking the numbers. So people would
wait. We just pivoted to video, Eleanor. What are you trying to say?
Don't dump all your money into it. That's all.
Well, we're spending millions on this production.
Yeah,
right
they
now.
were.
I think this production.
Set.
That's a set.
Yeah.
No. So
I don't remember approving that expense.
This lighting guy, I mean, hundreds of thousands just on the lighting here.
Yeah, so exactly, like, know how a medium and what you're investing in supports your goals, and get the data before you really, you know, some things are cheap to try, but really think about, like, are we doing this just because it feels good for our ego, or are we doing this because it will support our our company goals and our marketing and sales goals? And, you know, I know that I can sometimes bias written content over other formats. Also because, as you know, editing video and audio takes a really long time. It can cost a lot of money. So it just depends, you know, where you want your resources and your budget and where your audience is, really. It's not about the primacy of one over the other. It's just how it ladders up into your strategy.
Great answer.
Really focused,
Eleanor,
too. She didn't, you know, I mean, like, you really, Liz gave her an off-ramp into humor and joshing around, and Eleanor brought it right back.
Did not take the bait. Yeah.
She didn't. I know. It was impressive.
I'm not a funny person.
Last and possibly controversial question. How do you feel about, you know, writing for the robots, like, so producing content that for SEO versus producing content for your users? And how do you balance, you know, producing the content that means that things will be seen versus producing the content that, is, you know, things that you know will be found versus the things that you know that will be useful to your users, or provide whatever value you're actually trying to provide via this material?
That is a great question. I mean, I think if you're a small to medium-sized company, it's important to think about SEO, you know, and it's important to compete with that, but you can't have that be the sole basis of your strategy. The company I'm at now, we have invested a lot in SEO and it's helped us. But I think now the other thing is, if you're especially writing for Google, right? We're talking about Google, we're talking mostly for SEO. They are changing how they do things all the time. So if you're staked on, so a few years ago, it was like, you just need to write as much as you can, you like using these keywords as many times as possible. That's no longer the case. And you actually are punished for that. You know, so I think you can really drive yourself crazy and spend a lot of money, you know, if you're only doing it for SEO. So I feel like you want to start with the value to the users first, like, especially with limited resources, you want to make sure that whatever you're producing is going to speak to your community. And then you want to put that SEO sort of veneer on it. So whether that's working with an agency who's going to help you and say, okay, here's where you put in the links, like here's the keywords to hit for these topics, work them in, you know, or if that's using a tool like SEMrush or another tool. And I'm not sponsored, I'm just talking about the tools I use. There's a lot out there that will help you find, you know, those keywords to work in and kind of run your content through that, and they'll give you a grade. It's like very satisfying, you know? So I think, and you know, if you have more resources, you can do both. There's definitely articles where the SEO agency we work with will outline them for me. I'll be like, great, seems fine, assign it to a freelancer. But it is a push-pull because SEO agencies don't know about your industry. So there's been times like ours have come to me and be like, can you write a post about this? And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, we can't talk about ourselves like that. Or actually, that phrase you found is one of our competitors and we won't write a blog post about that. And they're like, oh, you know, so you need to be sure that you are still talking to your users, even if the focus is SEO. So again, the push-pull, you have to think about it. But I think like robots are really helpful, but because things are always changing, you know, people first. Exactly.
Yeah, no, I like it, Eleanor. People first, robots second.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes, I mean, I'll get things where I'm just like, oh my God, this is just SEO, blah, 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 you know, garbage. And
I mean, Google food does not taste good.
Yeah.
You know it when you find it. It just doesn't taste that good.
It's robot food.
It's robot food. So, you know, I think also thinking about where do we really need that? And like, where does it not make sense to have it? So, you know, I think that also, and how does it impact, especially if you're looking at something like a website or web page, like there could be tensions also between like UX and SEO, because some SEO things will be like, you need all these words on the page. And you're like, no, that just doesn't make sense with how we want people to flow, like through our website or, you know, through, you know, a certain sales funnel. So just, it's always a conversation, right?
Sounds like the answer is it depends.
Imagine.
Is that going to be the title for the episode, Liz?
Maybe. Eleanor,
it depends.
We would like you to shill your shillables now. Will you show us all of the amazing books you've written and say a couple words about them, please?
Sure, thank you. So I have I have 3 books out, but 2 that are more recent and I'm really proud of are a workbook for creative professionals called Quit Your Day Job. Note, I have a day job, so I didn't take my own advice. But this book kind of collects all the marketing and creative small business knowledge I've amassed over 20 years or so, from making zines to doing programming in cultural institutions to being in marketing for a decade. And it has handy worksheets that can help you with your idea, whether that is like, I just want to do something on the side, or I want to sort of repivot my career. When I wrote the first version of this book, I did pivot my career from arts administration to what I do now. So I guess it did work in some ways, but it was just a new day job. I also have a master's in public administration, fun fact. So I am not afraid of a spreadsheet or a budget. And if you are afraid of a spreadsheet or a budget, here to help. And there's even Google Sheet templates you can use to help you organize yourself. So, and then my most recent book is called Riot Woman. It's personal essays and cultural criticism. In case you can't tell, I came of age in the 1990s when the internet was young and we spent too much time on AOL Instant Messenger. And I built a site myself on GeoCities, and a friend, your photos are taking so long to load, you need to optimize them for the internet. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I scanned these photos and put them on my website. What do you mean the file's way too big? So we've come a long way in 25 years, but this is looking back at that time and coming from a punk rock background, which I know Liz also has, and thinking about how it applies now as someone in early middle age. So, and it came out just last year in the fall.
So
and,
is that book contains instructions on how to seamlessly progress from punk to middle age?
Seamless might be a little bit strong.
Like an artful transition between punk and middle age?
It might actually perseverate upon the painful transition
between guitar smashing and kitchen renovations.
I mean,
exactly.
I think rule number one: get yourself some fake glasses. You know, some fake glasses, maybe a scarf.
I got the fake glasses too, but they actually made the circles under my eyes look worse. So
I think those look great. And I love both of those books, and Riot Woman in particular. And Eleanor invited me to help intro her at a talk she gave when she was doing her book tour for Riot Woman. It was a great honor. And thank you so much, Eleanor. It was really nice of you to join us.
Thank you for having me. And I think the through line in all of this, at least in the books, but also this, is that community is really important no matter what you're doing. So, and I know I've known all of you for a while now. So it's nice when you can keep working with folks from different parts of your life as you all progress in life, in business, and everything else. So and I should say these books are on Microcosm Publishing, which was just ranked by Publishers Weekly as one of the fastest growing indie presses, but they're a indie press out of Portland, Oregon. So they put out a lot of really cool titles.
That's pretty awesome, Eleanor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun, you all.
Yeah.
And I feel like I know so much more about content strategy now.
I hope so. It is a nebulous field, and I do want to say it might be funny to recommend this resource, but if you're really what the heck is content strategy or even digital marketing, HubSpot, which is a marketing automation software, has amazing resources. So many, it can be hard, but they have a lot of great stuff if you're just looking for what is this, how does it work? And they also have certification, some of which is free, and I think some of which is not free, if you really want to get into it. And if you really want to get into it, Forrester Research has great certification and amazing resources, but that's also costs money. So
thanks again, everybody. This has been another episode of D3TV.
Thanks a bunch, folks.
Thanks.
And if anyone wants to find us, you can find us on the interwebs at door3.com. They can email us at projects@door3.com. And see you in a couple weeks.